The first thing he thought was hospital. He was on his back on a table, in warm, damp air, under a light. There was something across his chest holding him down, and when his eyes cleared enough to focus on the three shapes standing over him, he understood that whatever this was, it was not a hospital, and the three things looking down at him were not doctors. They were under 5 feet tall, bald, with domed heads far too large for their bodies, thin limbs, small hands, small nostrils, almost no ears, and the eyes. He would spend the next 50 years trying to describe the eyes and never get closer than this. Enormous, almost entirely brown, with hardly any white in them at all. Travis Walton was 22 years old. He had been gone 5 days. He remembers about 2 hours. And while he was on that table, 400 miles of Arizona forest were being searched for his body because 6 men had told the police what they watched happen to him, and the police had concluded that the 6 of them had killed him. I want to be clear about why this case is the one I keep coming back to. Out of all of them, almost every account of the Greys comes to us the same way. One person, one dark road, no corroboration, and a story that has to be taken entirely on the word of the person telling it. This one had a payroll, 7 men in a truck, time cards, a federal contract, a foreman, and 6 of them left standing in the road when it was over. 6 men who would be interrogated, polygraphed, treated as murder suspects, and asked for the next 50 years to take it back. Whatever came down through those trees on the 5th of November, 1975, did not pick a man who was alone. November 5th, a Wednesday. 7 men were thinning brush for the Forest Service in the Apache-Sitgreaves National Forest in the high pine country of eastern Arizona in a tract called Turkey Springs. The foreman was Mike Rogers, 28. The youngest on the truck was Steve Pierce, 17. Between them, Ken Peterson, John Goulet, Dwayne Smith, Alan Dallas, and Travis Walton, a Sawyer and Rogers' closest friend. They finished just after 6 and started for Snowflake. And somewhere on the forest road, Rogers slowed the truck because there was a glow coming through the pines on the right. The object was low. A disc, hanging over a pile of cut timber, maybe 100 feet out. And Travis Walton, for reasons the other men could never fully explain, got out. 6 stayed in the cab, 1 walked toward it. And of the 7 men on that truck, the only one who approached the thing is the only one it took. Then a beam of light came out of it. Here I want to slow all the way down, because this is the one image 6 men saw at once, from the same seat, in the same second, and it is the image that has to be explained by anybody who wants this case to go away. It was not a spotlight. A spotlight throws a cone with a soft edge and a spill of brightness around the center. None of them described a cone. It was not a flash either, because a flash is over before you register it, and this was not over. What they described was closer to a column, a defined shaft off the underside of the object that reached Walton where he stood and did not widen and did not waver. And then the part nobody on that crew ever softened. It did not knock him down, it threw him. 6 men watched a grown man's body leave the ground, lifted and flung backward through the air with his arms out, and dropped, the way you throw something you're finished with. Then they hit the gas and did not stop for a quarter of a mile. They came back. They searched the clearing with the light going out of the sky. No craft, no glow, no Travis. And that night, one of them drove to a phone and called the sheriff's office, which is the single most important thing the 6 of them ever did, and I'll come back to why. Because the county did not hear a UFO report, the county heard 6 men place themselves at the scene of the disappearance of a 7th. Deputy Chuck Ellison took the report and did not believe a word of it. Sheriff Marlon Gillespie came out, listened, and took them back up the mountain with flashlights. Then 5 days of deputies, volunteers, tracking dogs, and a helicopter in temperatures that went below freezing overnight, looking for a man who had walked off in a t-shirt and a denim jacket. No blood, no drag marks, no torn clothing, no body. So the sheriff did what any rural sheriff does with 6 men, 1 missing companion, and a flying saucer story. he tested them. Cy Gilson, from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, an examiner the state's own law enforcement used regularly, put the crew on the polygraph. The questions were not gentle. Did you harm Travis Walton? Do you know where his body is? Did you actually see what you say you saw? That is what these men were being asked. Not is there life on other planets. Where is the body? 5 of the 6 passed, cleanly. The 6th, Alan Dallas, came back inconclusive, which Gilson attributed not to deception but to a man too hostile in the chair to give a usable read. And Gilson did not hedge behind the careful language examiners hide in. His report said the tests established these 5 men did see an object they believed to be a craft, and that Travis Walton had not been injured or murdered by any of them. Then the line I think is the most important sentence in the entire file. If the sighting was faked, the 5 had no prior knowledge of it. Understand what that is and where it came from. Not a UFO group testing believers. A state examiner, in the middle of an active homicide investigation, brought in specifically to break 6 men who instead signed his name to the opposite. Which is why, when we get to what Travis Walton says he saw in that room, we are not starting from 0. We are starting from 6 men who watched something take him and passed a homicide-grade polygraph saying so while they were still suspects in his murder. So, the room. He came up out of it slowly, in pain. In air he described as warm and humid, with a light above him and something laid across his chest. He thought he had been in an accident. He thought people were working on him. Then his vision cleared, and the 3 figures resolved. Under 5 feet, hairless, domed skulls too big for the frame, skin he described as whitish, almost the color of a mushroom, thin arms, delicate hands, tight coveralls, orange or reddish-brown depending on which telling you read, and that is the kind of small inconsistency I trust more than perfect consistency, because a man who has told a story for 50 years should have some drift in the fabric and none in the shape. And the faces did nothing, no expression at all. He said they looked like fetuses. He was terrified, in a way he has described in interviews half a century later as the thing that lived in his nightmares afterward. And he did the least advisable thing available to a weakened man on a table, surrounded by 3 unknown beings. He got up and went at them. He grabbed something off a shelf or a surface near him, a tube-shaped object, and swung it and shouted. And they left. I want to stop on that, because it is the detail that does not fit the story anybody would build. 3 beings that had somehow moved a man from a forest road to a table, that had him restrained and weakened and alone, backed out of the room rather than deal with him. They did not subdue him. They did not gas him. They did not put him back down. A man who could barely stand waved a piece of their own equipment, and they withdrew. If you were inventing captors, you would not invent captors who retreat. So he was alone, and he did the other thing nobody would think to invent. He went exploring. He describes a corridor and a room that stopped him, curved, with a single chair, and something like a field of stars visible around him. He sat in it. He touched a lever, and the stars moved. Then a sound behind him, and he turned, and the second kind of being was standing in the doorway. This one was tall, around 6 feet, and human. Human enough that Walton's first thought was rescue, military, NASA, anyone. Blue coveralls, a heavy belt, and a clear helmet. He started firing questions at the man, dozens of them, all at once. The man said nothing, not one word. He took Walton by the arm and gestured for him to follow. And this is the point where the story stops being an abduction account and becomes something considerably harder to file. Because through the helmet, Walton could see the man's eyes, and the eyes were not right. Slightly too large, and gold, shining bright gold. He was led down a corridor, then down a ramp, and the ramp was a walkway out of the disc he had been inside. He came out into a space he described as a hangar, curved, enormous, lit by something that looked like natural light, and parked in it other discs, not one, several, which is a bigger claim than the one everybody argues about. One disc over a logging road is a sighting, Several of them parked in a lit space is an installation, and installations have a location. He noticed and mentioned that the air out there was easier to breathe. Down 2 more hallways, into a room with 3 more of them. 2 men and a woman, human-looking, the same 2 large eyes, no helmets this time. He asked them what was happening, where he was, whether they were going to help him. They smiled at him. That was all. He has described it as a dull, fixed pleasantness, and it seems to have unsettled him more than anything the small ones did. And there is something running underneath this whole account that I did not notice at first. Nothing in it makes a sound, not the craft on the road, not the small ones on the table, not the man in the helmet, asked 100 questions and answering none. 5 days, 2 kinds of being, a hangar full of machinery, and in the entire account not 1 word is ever spoken to him by anything. They led him by the arm to a table and motioned for him to sit. The woman was holding something like an oxygen mask. Before he could react, it was over his face. That is the end of what Travis Walton remembers. He woke up on the highway outside Heber, face up on the pavement, and the disc was directly above him, and in the curve of its hull he could see the night sky, the trees, and the reflected white line of the center of the road. Then it went, and the heat left the air, and he got to his feet and walked to a phone booth at a service station and called collect. 5 days. He thought it was the same night. He thought his crew had only just driven off. He genuinely believed he might still be able to catch them. Now here is the word I have not been able to put down, and it is not a word from 1975. It is a word Walton started using recently. Help. In interviews last year, at 72 years old, he said something he did not say in the 70s or the 80s or in the movie. He said he now believes he was badly injured by whatever hit him in that clearing, and that the reason he woke up on a table with a device across his chest and 3 of them standing over him is that they were trying to keep him alive. I have turned that over for a long time, because look at what it reorganizes. There is no examination in his account, no instruments, no needles, no procedure. That was invented for the film, and he has said so for 30 years. There is a table, a warm room, a device on his chest, and 3 beings who retreat rather than fight a frightened man. There is a sedative-like mask administered by something that looks human and smiles. And there is a man set down, not dumped in the wilderness, but on a paved highway within walking distance of a working telephone. If you wanted to build the story of a monstrous abduction, none of that is what you would build. Every piece of it is wrong for the genre, which leaves 2 readings, and I can hold both and settle neither. Either that is the shape of something that was never hostile in the first place, or it is the shape a man's memory takes after 50 years of needing what happened to him to have meant something. And now the case against. Because if I hand you only the parts that survive, I am running the same con as the men who sell this from a stage. 10 days after the disappearance, the National Enquirer, chasing the story and about to pay for exclusive rights, arranged a polygraph for Walton himself. The examiner was John McCarthy, 20 years on the machine. His finding was not soft, and it was not inconclusive. The report used the words gross deception and stated that Walton was attempting a hoax and had not been aboard any craft, and that he had tried to distort his own breathing to beat the instrument and failed at that too. Then the test was buried, kept out of the UFO organization's published account, kept out of the press, and it did not surface for months. It came out because a skeptic named Philip Klass went looking for it. I won't wave that away. A failed lie detector test, suppressed by the people promoting the case, is exactly the shape a hoax makes, and it cuts where believers hate. The same instrument that cleared the crew of murder failed the man at the center of it, in the same county, weeks apart. 3 months later, Walton sat for a far less experienced examiner and passed, and that is the one that got the headlines. Klass reported he had a hand in choosing the questions. The medical exams handed the skeptics a second brick. A man who goes 5 days without food shows it in his chemistry, because the starving body burns its own fat and the byproduct floods the urine. Walton's ketone levels came back low, and there's a motive to hang it on. The tabloid paid $5,000 for the best case of the year, split among them. Rogers was months behind on that contract, and Class argued that a man who cannot finish on time has an excellent reason to want an act of God to dissolve it for him. In fairness, the machines never settled down either. In 1993, Gilson himself retested Walton, Rogers, and Dallas with newer methods, and all three passed. Then in 2008, Walton went on a Fox game show, said yes when they asked if he had been taken, and the show's polygraph called it false. Truthful, inconclusive, gross deception, truthful again, false, for cash prizes, on television. And then, this year, the hardest thing that has ever happened to this case. Mike Rogers, the man who was driving the truck, died on the 6th of February, 2026, in home hospice in the White Mountains of Arizona. He had already spent years coming apart from the story. In 2021, he posted a public notice saying he should no longer be counted as a witness to Walton's abduction, and days later, on a recorded call, called the whole thing deliberate and staged, before he and Walton issued matching apologies and reset. According to his daughter, in January, before the morphine started, he called her and told her to hurry, and confessed to helping stage it, and asked her to apologize to the world for him. Then she deleted the post, and her account also claimed her father was responsible for crop circles in England and for part of the Phoenix Lights, which is where even the skeptics got off. A documentary filmmaker who has worked this case for years disputed the post's authenticity outright. A veteran investigator who has spoken with Walton, Rogers, and Pierce concluded it does not hold up. The recordings she says exist have not been released. So it is not over, and it did not close, and I refuse to pretend either way. Here is where I actually am. Everything about the interior of that craft rests on one man, and one man alone. Trust that as little as you want to, but the beam does not rest on him. The beam rests on 6 loggers who ran, who called the police on themselves, who were worked as murder suspects for 5 days, and who sat down in front of a state examiner while their friend was still missing and passed. So the questions I can't close, and they are not about the 6. If those 5 men could not have known the object was faked, and that is the state examiner's written conclusion and not mine, then what was hanging over that slash pile, and who was inside it? What are 3 beings doing on a table for 5 days that leaves a man with 2 hours of memory, a mask over his face, and no marks that anybody could ever point to? Why does every version of this account have them backing out of the room? And why, out of all the places to put a man down, a highway and a paved shoulder and a telephone 200 yards away? Snowflake is still up there in the pines. The logging road is still there. The Forest Service still thins that timber. And a 72-year-old man in Arizona still says that the last thing he saw before he stood up on that highway was the center line of the road bent around the curve of something that was not built here. I don't know what came down through those trees. I know that 6 men were willing to be accused of murder rather than say it didn't.